Welcome to the Women's Sanctuary, the podcast about tending the soul of women, sisterhood, and the rise of the sacred feminine. I'm your host, Arlia Hoffman. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Women's Sanctuary. This is Arlia, and I have a gift for you today. I'll call it a gift. It's a conversation I've been thinking about for quite a while, and it popped up recently with an interaction on Facebook with my friend Julie Greenberg, and who's been a connection for years, and so I've watched her process, and so it felt like just the perfect time for a conversation. Julie and I both have experienced a challenging relationship with our fathers, and they have each since passed. And, as she has navigated that process, it has helped me reflect on my own. And so I'm hoping that today what our conversation will offer you is some insight into if you have had a difficult relationship with your father or a different family member or someone else in your life, how the arc of that relationship might unfold, and what happens when they pass. And it's an entire rainbow of experience and emotions. I know it was for me. And at the time that my father passed, I didn't have any context for that. I didn't have anybody else to look to help me understand what was happening. So I hope in that regard, this is helpful for you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Julie. Julie Greenberg is an intuitive lifestyle and wellness coach, empowering women to expand their sense of self-trust, personal satisfaction, and fulfillment. Within her unique hybrid practice, Nourish Nurture Nest, love that, Julie provides an integrated approach to holistic wellness through mind, body, and spirit connection. With her full presence, grace, and compassion, Julie offers her clients gentle guidance, inspiration, and tools and practices for making empowered choices so they feel more balanced and aligned with their core values and desires. Clients learn to connect with their true selves and cultivate loving relationships with their bodies using mindfulness practices, intuitive eating, and using wholesome, nutritious food as medicine, as well as prioritizing and maintaining beautiful, functional, inspired spaces as an integral aspect of their sacred soul care. There's so much alignment in the work we do. It's beautiful. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you.
I'm so happy to have you. We've known each other online for a number of years, and I think this is the first time we've chatted face to face, so I'm thrilled to have you.
Likewise. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So I don't even really know where to begin. So my father passed in 2017, and since then I have worked on that grief process. Give us some context for your relationship with your father growing up and how that impacted you.
Oh gosh,
It's a big one, I know.
Yeah. So
whatever feels, right for you to share.
Sure. So I grew up in Philadelphia, and my parents separated when I was 7 and divorced when I was 10. I am the only girl. I have 3 brothers, one older brother and 2 younger brothers who are twins. So I'm kind of like middle child, only girl, which definitely proved to be a tricky role in my family. And when my parents separated for a variety of reasons, the kids, my brothers and I, all continued living in the family home with my dad. And my mom moved out and had a little kind of funky apartment and was juggling lots of part-time jobs and just trying to navigate, being newly independent. But she was still very present in our lives. Um, and there was definitely a lot of drama and intense emotion swirling around in our home, resulting from their split. And I guess I've always been a highly sensitive little being, just felt a lot. My mom used to call me a universal empath.
Mm.
And it really wasn't until recently that I began to understand and really kind of embody and integrate what she meant by that, because it's very apparent that that's who I am. So, that being said, I think that as a little girl, I was really um, swept up in and deeply impacted by mostly my dad's big emotions, which ranged from probably grief
Mhm.
and anger around the loss or the end of their marriage. And what I understand now, I think what I felt then and understand now is like he projected a lot of his anger toward my mom, onto me, because I was the most like her, being female and looking a lot like her. And I know now, of course, that he never meant to hurt me or do harm. Um, and I just didn't really have the tools. I wasn't equipped to know what to do with all of that, like displaced, misplaced emotion
Mhm.
that wasn't mine. Um, and so I guess that translated, part of how that translated is like I just really felt like I didn't belong in my family. I felt very other and othered.
Mhm.
Um, and I felt resented,
Mm.
and later came to recognize that I felt scapegoated. So there was always a sense of like, and I really have carried with me. In fact, my dad actually said the words to me. Well, what I was going to say is, I always felt like everything was my fault,
Mm.
and I now understand that. I mean, that I have a memory of coming home from a sleepover, when I was probably, I don't know, 8, um, and quickly getting embroiled in some conflict with one of my brothers, which turned into a conflict with all of my brothers. And my dad, I hear my dad's words saying, "Everything was fine until you came home." So that pierced deeply and stung hard and
Mhm.
stayed with me always.
Mhm.
So that's sort of, one example of like an undercurrent of the theme that, um,
That's really interesting. I'm going to jump in here and say I had a pretty devastating, traumatic moment with my father when I was 8.
mm,
Not sure I'm willing to go into the details, but well, I guess I will, because they're both gone. But he was delusional in thinking that my mother and sisters were going to die that day. And so he took me and I don't know, somewhere and told me they were gone. And of course, as an 8-year-old, you believe and you grieve and you react. And we got home about an hour later and they were there. Um, there was more to the circumstances, but that was enough. And I feel so much compassion for our young selves to, and any young person, navigating the emotional landscape of the people around them with no context. That's what we
your
spend the
share.
rest of our lives working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like unpacking that, trying to make sense of things that don't make sense.
Mhm.
Your share reminded me of another, um, kind of significant piece that I often don't remember or think about, but also age 8. I remember I was in second grade and I had this dream, and it was so vivid. My brothers and I were getting off the school bus at the end of our block, and our dad was there to greet us, which was not typical. And he greets us at the school bus and says, we're gonna go buy new shoes. So we're walking back to the house to prepare to go get new shoes. And as we turn to walk home in the dream, he gets shot. Somebody approaches and shoots my dad right in the chest, right in front of us. And so, of course, that was terrifying. Um, and really, all I remember is like waking from that dream with such a overwhelming sense of it being real, so
Mm,
much so that at breakfast that morning, I didn't register his presence. He was there. It was a normal day. We go to school, but I am just a puddle of tears and emotion and terror because I saw my dad get shot.
mm,
And I'm at school. I can't stop crying. I explain like my dad was shot. He's in the hospital. I don't know if he's gonna be okay. And I like created this whole story. And they
mm,
sent me to the office and they call my parents. My dad ran a school. My mom taught at the school. The school administrator calls my parents' school, speaks to my mom and says, is Arnold okay? And she said, yeah, he's fine. He's right here. And they explain that I'm telling this story. And I'm picked up at school, brought home. I miss a week of school. I'm just like so caught in this unreality.
mm,
Um, and it was really traumatic. And until I was probably about 11 or 12, I had like this patch of dry skin on my chest in the exact spot where he was
mm.
shot. So it's just a bizarrely intense memory and experience. And
Yeah,
I'm still not sure what it really signifies, but it was relevant in terms of your share about that
yeah, yeah,
dad's delusional state and
yeah.
how that impacted you.
Ooh, yeah. So, w- how did your relationship with your father evolve during adulthood?
Um, Complicated to say the least. Another quick thing I'll just share about childhood. When I was 10, right when my parents' divorce was finalized, my dad took my brothers and me on a cross country trip for 6 months, traveling around in a trailer. And I really didn't want to go. Uh, I just wanted to remain in Philadelphia, live with my mom, and just, not leave my friends. So that was difficult.
Hmm.
And so it was a long 6 months. And I was not happy during that time. I look back now, of course, and I really recognize and appreciate what his intent was, why he wanted to share that experience with us. Um, and after that trip, my older brother and I went to live with my mom. My younger brothers lived with my dad, and we lived very different
Mm,
lifestyles. Um, and then throughout my adolescence, I kind of bounced back and forth between their homes for a variety of reasons. And so I graduated high school living with my dad, then went back and lived with my mom while going to college in Philadelphia and commuting. It was local. Um, and it was during that time that my mom became ill and over a almost 3 year period of time finally um,
mm.
succumbed to her cancer battle. That was in 1990. And
And you were how old?
I was almost 22 when she died. And I was 19 when I was home alone with her before we knew she'd have been having a number of really challenging symptoms um, and getting pretty frustrating results and non-conclusive
Mm,
information from doctors. And she ended up having a grand mal seizure,
Mm.
which I witnessed. So I saw this happen, and I got her to I called 911 and got her to the hospital and spent a whole day navigating that situation. And then learned that evening that she had 3 inoperable brain tumors.
Mm.
And meanwhile, right around the time that this took place, my dad and my brothers had all moved to Maine. So I was the only one
Mm.
home to deal with all of this. So that was a whole other complicated, traumatic time, um, that is now so long ago. So soon after my mom passed away, my brothers all moved back to Maine. They had come home to sort of be with us throughout her death and dying process. Um, and then several months later, I followed and moved to Maine, because I had fallen in love. And so I moved here, and gosh, there's so much. Um, I got some really conflicting messages from my dad. Like, I know that he always wanted the best for me. Um, and I guess I felt really pressured during the time that my mom was dying. I ended up dropping out of college. I didn't finish my bachelor's degree, and I know that my dad really wanted me to
Mm.
go back to school. Um, I remember at one time he said to me, "You should go back to college so that you can be around like-minded people and find." Said something like, "and find somebody to marry." And I was like, "Wait a second. Did you, Mr. Alternative Education, you know, radical thinker, just say to me, your only daughter, you should go to college so that you can find a husband?" And I was really struck and hurt by that.
Mhm.
And I feel like that is a really good example of the ways that he kind of just inadvertently, I believe. I know he had good intentions. He was just a little bit maybe oblivious,
Mhm.
um, in certain capacities, and also brilliant. So that was this dichotomy. It was like he was this genius, brilliant, beautiful mind, and yet he was human, and he
Yeah.
blundered, and a lot. Um, and so I didn't follow his advice, and I was also really intent on becoming a mother. Definitely in the months following my mother's passing, I was living alone in Philadelphia. I had a great job, I had a great apartment. I was kind of living the dream. I was 22 years old, newly independent, but I was fixated on motherhood. And it really consumed a lot of my thoughts and energy. There was like just this pull.
Mhm.
I don't think I knew that then, but I remember it now. And so, as I'd mentioned, well, I'd come to Maine to visit, met this young man, fell in love, and came back to Philadelphia, wrapped up my life, like gave notice at my apartment, gave notice at my job, packed up, moved to Maine to be with this person. And soon after that, that statement from my dad about going back to college, and also telling me that this person wasn't good enough for me, um, even though they were so similar. Um, I just really set my sights on and made it clear to this person, you know, I feel ready to have a baby. It's all I can think about. And he said that's what he wanted to do. So we found a beautiful little home, moved forward, made a baby, and very quickly it became clear that we were probably not going to work out and
Mm.
last as a couple. And so that proved to be true. But we hung in there for the first year of our daughter's life, and there was another really telling thing. When I told my dad I was pregnant, he was like, he did not approve, and he said, "That's a really bad idea. You're going to end up a single mom, and no man is ever going to want to be with you because you're going to be a burden."
Mm.
I was just kind of like, Lord, like, it's one thing if that's what he thought and believed, but that he said it to me
Yeah.
was pretty devastating. And
Yeah.
in fact, that was what happened. I became a single mom, and I was single for a long, long time, and mostly by choice. It's not to say that I didn't often long for a right aligned partnership,
Hmm.
but sometimes I felt like he plagued me, like he, or cursed me, I guess would be the
Mm.
word. I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, did he somehow cast this spell and make this be true? Um, so that's another example of the flavor of devastation.
Yeah, I would say that, those closest to us almost do that, because if they're deeply embedded in our psyche, then you can't unhear those things. And
Yeah.
even if you don't believe them, there is an impact. For sure. I
So
remember I was very young, so there's that. But I was 19 and dating my first husband, and it was the only time I stood up to my father, who was a minister, but he wasn't in the right. My boyfriend wasn't in the right denomination, and I was getting judgment about that. Well, he's not one of us, and so this authoritarian, narcissistic man who you just didn't cross. I stood up. The only time in my life I said, "How dare you?" He's a good person. He, listed the reasons, and it's like, and this is what I'm doing. Um, but yeah, those those
I can relate to
crossroads
that.
where they decide what's best for us, right?
Yeah. And, I think that's such a critical piece you highlighted there with the use of the word crossroads, because I feel like at each juncture in my life, at each time point in my life where I was ready to make a big life choice,
Hmm.
those were the times when I butted up against our wills, you know, butted
Hmm.
heads. So, for example, I remember shortly after my mom died, but before moving to Maine, well, so this is a tricky thing. I recently listened to a podcast episode of Glennon Doyle's We Can Do Hard Things,
Hmm.
um, where she interviewed the woman who wrote a book titled "I'm Glad My Mom Died" or something like
Hmm.
that. My mother died, which is that's a pretty loaded statement, let alone
Hmm.
book title. But I really resonated with so much of her story, and have always felt a little bit mm, hesitant to share that following my mom's death, like there had been, this almost 3 year period where thoughts of her death and dying consumed me. The
Yes.
uncertainty of it, like when, how, what's
Hmm.
it going to look like, who will I be, how will I function
Hmm.
without my mom? And then she died, and I felt this sense of liberation and freedom and lightness that I didn't anticipate, and I felt guilty about feeling. And I remember saying to my dad on the phone, gosh, all of a sudden I feel really excited and inspired to travel. I never even thought about traveling because I thought, I just imagined I'd be here for the rest of my life. This is what I know. This is where I'm going to be. And he said to me, well, you can't travel. You don't know enough about the world. And I was like, isn't that how you learn about the world?
Isn't that the point?
Right. And also, I'm like, interesting. Did you say this to your three sons who have all traveled internationally before they left? I mean, and didn't you drop out of college and hop on a Norwegian freighter when you were 17 to see the world? Like, isn't that how you learned about the world? So there was that interesting dynamic of it became more and more clear as I got older, like, okay, he definitely treats me differently
Yeah.
than my brothers. Um, so that happened. And then, soon after there was the piece about telling me that the young man I was involved with wasn't good enough for me and that I should go to college to find a husband. Um, and then, yeah, just multiple examples. Oh, when my daughter was 3, I fashioned a plan with a dear old friend who I'd met actually at that same time when I met my daughter's father when I came for that visit. And we developed a really beautiful friendship. She had moved to California with her mother and her new baby. And here I was. I have a 3.5 year old daughter, and like things are not going well. Like I'm struggling
Mhm.
to make ends meet and keep a roof over our head. And my friend and I decided, like, well, why don't I move to California and we just try to help each other out? So that's what I did, or that's what I decided. But I was met with a lot of resistance from my father and my stepmother. And I was told that I was being selfish.
Mm.
And how dare I take my child away from her family? And I was just kind of like, give me a reason to stay. Like, help me
Yeah.
make this make sense. But I want more for us. And so yeah, we really butted heads around that for a long time. I ended up moving. I just assured him, I was like, I have to try this. And
Mhm.
no matter what, like if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and I'll come back and I'll figure out the next step. But like I assure you, we're not going to end up living in a cardboard shelter on the street. I promise you that. And so I came back 9 months later,
Mm.
after selling everything I owned. Um, and yeah, there just continued to be
How do you feel?
complicated. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. How do you feel that impacted you? Those kind of the, well, we'll call them crossroads upon crossroads where you weren't supported.
I feel like I have a really clear answer. I feel like my dad's lack of faith in my perception of his lack of faith in me translated into lack of faith in myself.
Mhm.
So it has and sometimes continues to show up as not fully believing in my own capabilities.
Yeah.
But what I know now that I didn't know then, I just have example after example after example of times that I have leaned into uncertainty, trusted my intuition,
Mhm.
um, stood up to this male authority figure and just said, essentially, like, you're not the boss of me. Love you, and you
Yeah.
don't know better than me.
And look where you are now.
Yeah.
Like all those places where yeah, where you said you're not the boss of me. I'm going to do what I feel like is best for me. And um
Kind of, and also just like you have throughout your whole life. I mean, my dad was such a um I don't know, like almost mythical being. Like he just defied the odds in so many ways and did, march to the beat of his own drum and did big unconventional things like starting schools and starting a bakery in a rural town in Maine and growing it into this really beautiful community hub where um, folk musicians from all over the country, all over the world, really came to perform. I mean, he created a lot of really beautiful things and contributed a lot to humanity and to the communities that he touched. But I just feel like this dynamic with us of me continually having to meet the resistance from him, but that was also in me that said, like, you
Mm,
have to push back, girl. You have to show up for yourself and stand tall
mhm.
in your 5 foot, barely 5 foot tall frame. Um, but stand firm in your truth and your inner knowingness. Like, there are just so many examples of times where it was like my knowing of my truth was so big and so strong and so loud that I couldn't not listen. And I'm just kind of getting this now. Like, I know that my dad bumped up against the very same kind of resistance from his mom, and he had to
Mm,
listen to and heed the call of his inner knowing and truth,
mhm.
right, in order to do and create all that he did. And so I just think it's so interesting that he sometimes seemed so oblivious to the fact that we were having this same
Yeah,
mm, disconnect, right? Discord.
yeah.
But I feel like, Arlia, ultimately, that dynamic, that is what evolution is.
Mhm.
That's how humanity evolves. Like, it's inescapable and unavoidable that each generation is going to encounter that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And um, speaking of which, I felt this some similar liberation when my mother died, and she didn't die until just a few years ago. But having both of them gone liberated me from the belief systems that they lived in, but were still literally embodying in the sphere of my life. And so I think I know that that resistance, that discord, that tension between their values and mine, um, it was always there, and it's we can't help but internalize that. And yet, when they're gone, there's the freedom. I felt um, this spaciousness to be able to work more with those and jettison those that it was easier to let go of those that weren't me, all that was not me, even though you can't really overcome the experience of having had them as parents. But yes, it was like sharpening a knife, right? It really sharpens that sense of what is me and what is not me.
Mhm.
And yeah, in that sense, it's really useful. I remember one time my teacher, we did a movement class on resistance, and I perceived resistance as purely negative, but it's not. It's a defining, refining experience that says, "Are you sure? Is that real? Is that what you want?" That makes you have to be clear, find that clarity within yourself. And so for
I love
that,
that.
yeah.
It makes me think of how there's duality in everything, right? So, like, you're saying you previously thought of resistance as only negative, but we can flip it and instead think, like, oh, this resistance is an invitation to lean into my growth edge.
Mhm.
And why are we here if not to find and experience and expand into growth and
Yes.
our full potential?
Thank you for joining us on this first of two episodes with guest Julie Greenberg. When we talk with Julie next time, she's going to share about the illness and passing of her father and the stand she finally took for her own life. She and I also reflect on how our relationships with our parents look now that they are no longer in the physical realm. I pray these episodes on grief and healing are helpful for you. If you'd like more, please check out thewomenssanctuary.com/podcast for all episodes or anywhere you get your podcasts. Please like, share, and subscribe. I'm Arlia Hoffman. We'll see you here next time on the Women's Sanctuary.